we need to take care of some business first. So, remember our last hour today will be DBS? I would love that. If people would like to put their names in front of them, para mas mabilis tayo matuto. Remember our last hour will be DBS. Remember Alex? You're going to lead one? DBS no map? And who is the second? Yeah, that's right. Okay. So be ready for that. Okay. Another thing is quiz. I promised you a quiz. So let's start with our quiz. What is the first field? Access. What is the second field?
Seed sowing.
Seed sowing. What is the third field? Discipleship. Growing disciples. What is the fourth field?
Church planting.
I heard church planting.
How to
Harvest. Church formation. That's probably the most descriptive of that process. So basically, ang nangyayari dito, by the way, I mentioned this, but I want to emphasize again, these don't happen one at a time. They happen simultaneously, especially field 1 and 2 happen simultaneously. Field 3 and 4 also happen simultaneously. Merong pagitan dito. What is the boundary between second field and third field? Invitation? Invitation, and when someone is invited, they can... Ano ang tugon sa isang invitation? Yes, a decision. Yes, a decision. Now, again, for much of the evangelical world, this is a decision to accept Christ at this point. I don't know how, but they are good at getting people to accept Christ even before Bible studies. In our experience, it's usually a decision to start studying. Okay. So for the Mangyan, we actually do something like this. May echo agad. So here, this is a decision to start studying, and they study to the point of baptism. But at baptism, hindi pa naman talagang ready sila to stand on their own feet yet. So we continue studying with them after baptism. So for us, this third field has two phases: pre-baptism studies, post-baptism studies. But either way, both sides, these are what kind of studies? I heard it once. What kind of studies do we do? Inductive, exactly. I personally prefer DBS. If you look at the book T4T, may ibang klase naman doon. Tawag doon ay three-thirds process, but it's still an inductive Bible study. It's just what you add on to the beginning or the end of the study. It makes it different. Okay? Fourth field is binding off. Fourth field is finishing the process of binubuo sila as a church. So basically, we'll look at this later. Basically, what we do is we take all the characteristics na meron sa Acts chapter 2, and then we see ano ang meron sa church at ano ang wala pa sa church. And then work on developing yung mga wala pa sa church na yan. Okay? So yung definition ng church sa manual, hindi yun ang tinitingnan namin. Tinitingnan namin yung dun sa Acts 2. The manual is okay, pero it's more focused on organizational procedures. Ang focus natin dito ay missional and healthy churches. Okay? Also, the General Conference recognizes, meron talaga silang official statement, official document, recognized ng General Conference na ang church manual was developed for a mature church, by a mature church, for a mature church in the West. And they recognize that hindi lahat ng mga meron sa manual ay applicable sa bagong lugar, bagong mission field. Sa ibang lugar, hindi sa West. So actually may pahintulot ang General Conference na hindi gawin ang lahat ng mga elements ng church manual in pioneering missions. Ang requirement lang nila ay may plano to work towards becoming a fully compliant with the church manual. Okay. So, hindi naman ibig sabihin na lumalabag tayo sa church manual, pero ibig sabihin, halimbawa, sa mga mangyan, kung may disciplinary issues, hindi lang yung local church ang mag-vote. We tried to restrict them to just one church. Ito lang, kung may disciplinary problem. Pero sa ugali nila, hindi. Kung malaking issue, if it's a big issue, the whole tribe, in their own culture, the whole tribe gets together. And so it was actually breaking relationships. It was causing damage to them to try to say, no, you can't come. No, you can't come. Only these people can come. When they had a major issue, lahat ng mga Adventists, ng mga mangyan, nag-iipon at nagde-decide kung paano ayusin yun. That is the best way to maintain relational unity for them. Okay. So, we'll come back to this again a little bit later. What are some of the other things, Michael, help me, that we studied that we should ask them quiz questions about? Can anybody tell me the 6 questions of DBS? What's the first question? Yep. Kumusta ang iyong pag? Obey and share. Yep. Apply and share. And then what's the second? Second step. Read the next story. And how do you choose which stories? Chronological. Now, every single story from Genesis all the way through. Ang dami naman. At the beginning, hindi naman every story. Piliin natin yung mahalaga para sa, we call it creation to Christ, or what's the other term? Yeah, pwede rin yung crimson thread. Ibig sabihin, yung story of redemption, para ma-follow yung train of redemption. Okay? And then, what is the third? Retell the story. And what are the 2 ways you can retell the story? Or just actually retell the story. Yeah. Okay? And what's the 4th? Discuss it. And what do you want? That's the next one. This one is the discuss section. And the question would be, ano ang ibig sabihin? Yeah, what does it mean? We can ask questions like, what do we learn about God? What do we learn about humans? And specifically, meron tayong point na gusto natin mag-get nila. Now, do we tell them the point? Ask them questions. Draw them to discovering that point. Okay, 5th question. How can you apply it? And then the 6th? With whom will you share it? Very good. Okay. Now, back to Paul. Gaano katagal si Pablo nanatili sa isang mission field niya? How long did Paul stay? Yeah, we can see an average of 2 to 3 years. But sometimes, probably in Antioch, it was even longer than that. Although, parang putol-putol. Okay? Bakit umalis si Pablo ng maaga? Because of persecution. When Paul did have to leave, what did he do? He left someone there. He trained someone there. Yes, he did not just leave them at that point. Okay? Where can we best see a CPM in Paul's ministry? In Ephesus. In Ephesus. What happened in Ephesus? Okay. Yes. Each of these people took a turn pagkatapos ni Pablo. Pero habang nandyan pa, as while Paul was still there, what happened? Every day training in the school of Tyrannus, and then Yep. Just like Jesus did, sending out the faithful to tell others. They planted churches, brought trainees back for more training, sent out again, until in 2 years, reached na ang buong Asia. Okay. There was something I failed to say. Definite. Oh yeah, that's right. Ano ang definite aim? My recommended definite aim, and we're going to work with that for this training. Among unreached people groups. Very good. Dapat solo ninyo yan, ha? Sa PFM talagang required. Required na soloin yan. And anytime, anywhere, I can ask anyone to stand up and say that, and they should be able to say it. So, Michael, let's hear it.
Establish indigenous seven-day Adventist church planting programs among mixed people groups.
All right, very good. Yep. Okay, so I forgot something on Friday kasi sobrang nag-aapura ako para tapos din yung biblical foundation. So Paul would stay a fairly long time, okay? But I want to look at the kind of mission that Jesus did and the kind of mission that Paul did. May tinatawag na C1, C2, and C3. By the way, if you've heard of the Muslim C scale, this is not that. Iba ito. Totally different, okay? So C1 is mission to the same culture. So an American doing missions to with other Americans. And kasi diverse din naman yung America. So specifically, like my own socioeconomic group. Okay? C2 would be missions to a similar culture. So this would be, for example lang, this would be like ang Ilocano nag-mission sa Tagalog. Okay? Now, may pagkakaiba, may different culture, different language, pero similar naman. Similar naman. Makakaintindi naman ang Tagalog at ang Ilocano. Okay? C3 is fully cross-cultural. So, nung dumating kami upang maging missionary sa mga mangyan, cross-cultural na talaga yon. Alright? Which of these three did Jesus do? C1, C2, or C3? If you say coming from heaven to earth, yes, C3. But as a human, he became a Jew, and his mission was to the Jews. To the Jews. Now, merong ilang mga beses. For example, yung Syrophoenician woman at yung mga Greeks doon sa temple during his last week of his life. Pero most ng ministry ni Jesus ay C1. We usually don't think about that. Jesus' ministry was mostly C1. Okay? What kind of ministry did Paul do? C1, C2, or C3?
C1.
Okay, so Paul always started in the synagogue, so that would be C1. Pero, nung pinalis siya, always pinalis siya sa synagogue, ano ang kalagayan ng mundo ni Pablo sa panahon niya? What was Paul's world like? What is the term that we use for the world in Paul's time? The Jews called them Gentiles, but historically, what was the time called? What was the culture called? Greek. Greek, we call it Hellenization, or the Hellenic world, okay? Basically means, what happened is Alexander the Great conquered the world. He was a very good military conqueror. He was a not very effective ruler. Hindi siya makaset up ng government that would last. But actually, Alexander the Great's genius was not just military. He had an even greater genius. Believe talaga si Alexander the Great sa kanyang culture. Akala niya talagang ito ang the best in the world. Everyone needs Greek culture. So wherever he went, he spread Greek culture. And he set up systems para ang Greek culture ay kumalat doon sa mga lugar. And it was really effective. So effective that Rome reconquered all of Alexander's kingdom, pero hindi nila kayang i-conquer ang culture. So deeply entrenched ang Greek culture around the Mediterranean na kahit militarily nanalo ang Rome at pinipilit nila yung kanilang culture, yung kanilang mga Diyos, yung kanilang mga language, pero only really for government yun. When it came to the actual people, they were very much Hellenized. So when Paul went anywhere around the Mediterranean, he could immediately talk to people in the Greek language. Agad-agad makausap niya sila. Kasi lahat sila marunong mag-Greek. Lahat sila, alam nila yung basic cultural elements, yung basic stories, yung basic mga Diyos-Diyosan ng mga Greeks. Anywhere he went, he could immediately start working with people. Hindi kailangan maggastos ng 6 months to a year in language learning. Hindi niya kailangan mag-worldview and culture study. He did some. Pero ang underlying worldview ay pretty similar. May mga variations in cultural practices, pero yung underlying worldview, pretty similar. So really, what Paul did was primarily C2 missions. Now, pop quiz. How well do you know the book of Romans? Where was Paul planning to do C3? No. Macedonia was still C2. The book of Romans was written partially as a fundraising letter. He was writing it to Rome, and he was asking, hinihiling niya ang tulong, the help of Rome, to go where? He needed to take the money back to Jerusalem, but then he was planning on going through Rome to go to? Oh, my friends. He was going to Spain. He was planning to go to Spain. He said, I want you to help me on my way to Spain at the end of Romans. Plano niya talaga, nadadaan siya doon at financially tulungan siya ng mga taga-Roma na mag-mission doon sa Spain. That would have been C3. It would have been C3. Plano ng Diyos sana mag-C3 pa si Pablo. I just finished reading the section in Acts of the Apostles. Hindi kalooban ng Diyos ang nangyari doon sa Jerusalem. Yung ginawa ni James, na kailangan daw siya sa temple, hindi kalooban ng Diyos yun. God's plan was not for him to be removed from ministry yet. If that hadn't happened, he would have gone to Spain, and we would have had an example of what C3 looks like for Paul. Unfortunately, we don't. We don't have any examples in the Bible of a full-scale church planting project in C3 conditions, fully cross-cultural conditions. So wag tayong magtaka. Don't be surprised if Jesus and Paul took 3+ years. Actually, in Ephesus, kung i-include mo yung mga trainees niya na nagpalit sa kanya, I estimate it was about 15 years. Yung total project time ng Ephesus. If it took that long for that church planting movement to be not only established, but mature enough na pwedeng iwanan, at hindi siya pa rin mamamatay, how much more kung C3? So now do you understand why kami sa PFN, committed kami for as long as it takes? For sure, hindi lang 1 year for the Lord. Yeah. Now, we do have a 1-year program, pero yung 1-year program namin is to support those that are staying long-term. Kasi, we'll look at later, yung mga sabi ni Mrs. White tungkol sa pagsisimula ng mission and then iwanan. She's very, very strong against doing that. Okay, so yun yung hindi ko nasabi last Friday tungkol sa mission ni Pablo. Okay, now we are going to start on our topic for today. Culture and worldview. And this is focused around, we need to rewrite that later on. Anong salita doon sa definite aim natin? Indigenous. Anong ibig sabihin kaya ng indigenous? Native. Okay.
Why am I making?
Yeah. The things available at that place. Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes people First Nation.
First Nations, especially in Canada. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Local people. Okay. Local people, local things. Yes. Primitive. Okay. All right. Poor. All right. So, nung kinausap ko ang NCIP, alam naman ninyo yung NCIP, right? Familiar kayo? National Commission on Indigenous Peoples. IPRA Law, Indigenous Peoples Republic Act of 1997. Okay. So, nung kinusap ko ang INCEPI, sabi ko, para sa anong grupong tao, anong klaseng tao ang inyong work? Sabi nila, para sa mga indigenous peoples. Sabi ko, paano naman i-classify kung indigenous or hindi indigenous? Ay sabi nila, kasi yung mga tribo yon, yung mga tribo doon sa bundok. Pero di ba ang ibig sabihin ng indigenous ay yung mga talagang dating taga roon. So, ang Ilocano, ay tibang ang Ilocano or hindi? Well, they are indigenous to Ilocos. Ang mga Bisaya ay indigenous to Visayas. Yes? Ang mga Tagalog ay indigenous to Central Luzon, right? Tama ba? Yeah, okay. So, hindi usually iniisip natin na yun ay mga indigenous peoples, pero they are indigenous to that place. Yes. So, I am not indigenous to America. I am half indigenous to Sweden and half mixed up with everybody else. All the rest of them. Okay. But the other meaning of indigenous is what you guys were saying na, or you also, that hindi lang yung tao na galing sa lugar na yun, kundi yung kultura, yung ugali, the things that they have there. So when we say an indigenous Seventh-day Adventist church planting movement, we don't mean that we only work with tribal groups in the mountains. What we mean is when we work with a group, whatever unreached group they may be in Manila, they may be in Bangkok. Okay? Most of the unreached people in Thailand, basically sa Thailand, ang mga reached ay yung mga hill tribes. Yung unreached, yun yung mga taga-baba. Yung mga Thai talaga. So in Thailand, we don't focus on hill tribes. We focus on the Thais, mostly in the cities. Yes, so we have a big project in Khon Kaen, in Isan, in East Thailand. But we still focus on starting indigenous. Ibig sabihin, yung mga ugali at kultura nila ay nire-respeto natin. Now, I know that we have a strong presence and influence of Sulads here, so it shouldn't be too difficult to understand this, because I know that something's very, very strongly taught by Sulads. So, 3 things that we are going to talk about. First is why. Well, basically, kung bakit pag-aralan natin ang kultura nila. I always tell people that we need to mag-aral muna bago mangaral. Study first before teaching. Yeah. Okay, first reason. And here you get your first story. Does anybody know the Peace Child story? Yeah. Alam ni Kuya Jerry. Anybody else? Hindi pa? It's a good story. So si Don Richardson, isa sa pinaka kilala at very effective, very well-known modern missionary. Si Don Richardson, dun sa Irian Jaya, sa tribong Sawi. Si Don and Carol Richardson went to the Sawi tribe. Nung pumunta sila doon, wala pang tao doon na marunong mag-English. Or any other trade language. Kung dito baga, pwedeng mag-aral muna ng Tagalog, and then gamitin yung Tagalog para pag-aralan yung tribal languages. Or pwedeng mag-aral ng Bisaya, and then gamitin yung Bisaya, like that. So yun yung ginawa namin, kaya marunong ako mag-Tagalog. So we learned Tagalog to learn Alangan. But for them, they didn't. So it was very difficult for them to learn the language. Kind of like what Don was saying yesterday. Na turo lang. Ganun lang. So however, they had their theology, their understanding of the Bible was, kung hindi mo alam mismo ang pangalan ni Jesus, if you don't literally know and believe the name of Jesus, imposible na maligtas. Now, we understand from Romans 2 and other passages na may pag-asa. Possible na maligtas pa rin kahit hindi nila kilala si Jesus kung ginagawa nila the best that they know how to do, living up to the light that they have. Pero sa kanilang theology, hindi talaga pwede. So sa kanilang pagkaalam, every single one of those people in Irian Jaya, in the highlands, were going straight to hell. So it was a very, very deep, strong burden. Like talagang parang napapaso na sila sa eagerness to tell the story of Jesus, so that they would know, to believe, and trust in Jesus. And so they worked so hard para pag-aralan ang language ng mga Sawi. They worked and they worked and they worked and they worked and they worked. Finally, may basic knowledge sila, basic ability to speak the language of Sawi. Kaya very excited sila. Inipon nila ang buong tribo. Malit lang yung tribo nila, parang like 3,000. Inipon nila ang buong tribo at kiniwento nila ang kwento ni Jesus. Diretso sila, skip yung buong lumagtipan, diretso sila sa kamatayan, the death of Jesus, the crucifixion, resurrection of Jesus. Habang kinikwento nila, they got to the point na si Judas ay nanakwil kay Jesus. Nung narinig ng mga sawi iyon, nagsipalakpakan sila kay Judas. Sabi ni Don Richardson, ano to? Bakit ganun? So he tried to explain the story again. But they thought Judas was just the greatest. And eventually he figured out na sa kanilang culture, ang pinaka-highest value nila ay yung skill to betray. Yung pinakabayanin nila, yung mga mananakwil. So if you watch this on YouTube, there's a story, an example of how they would betray each other. Talagang bayanin nila. Kaya sabi nila, sa lahat ng mga tao, si Judas is the greatest betrayer of all because he could betray God himself. So kahit anong paliwanag ni Don and Carol Richardson, hindi talaga sila naniwala that Jesus was the hero. Ang pagkalam nila, si Judas talaga ang hero. So they were pulling their hair out for months, trying to figure out, how do we show them, how do we convince them that Jesus is the hero? Like, talagang nag-backfire yung kanilang plano. Ang bis sana that they would believe in Jesus. Now they look down on Jesus and look up to Judas. Backfired. Mag-aral mo na bago mangaral. Okay, they could have tried at least to avoid that. Tried to have explained it in a better way if they had taken the time to study the culture before starting to teach. Now, we're not meaning that we don't answer questions, that we stop people, that we hold back the Holy Spirit. No. But like starting an actual initiative, starting a plan, a program to actually reach the people, we recommend holding off until you've studied a little bit to avoid this kind of thing. So anyway, see Don and Carol Richardson, they tried and they tried and they tried and they tried and they tried. Walang nangyari. Until one day, ang tribong Sawi and the next tribe over had a tribal warfare. Now these are very small tribes, like I said, like 3,000 people each lang yung mga tribo nila. So they had about 30 people die from the Sawi tribe. So that's, my math right, 1%? 1% agad ng population nila, patay, just a couple, one or two battles. And they couldn't sustain that kind of population loss. So one day, Don Richardson woke up to find that the Sawi tribe, with their chief on one end, and the enemy tribe, nalimutan kong pangalan, with the chief on the other side, lined up in a clearing, facing each other. And the chief from the Sawi tribe took his infant daughter, and he went to the other side, and he went down the line, and each person from the enemy tribe put their hand on the head ng bata, ng sanggol, until they got to the chief on the other side, and the Sawi chief gave his daughter to the other tribe. And if you see the video, the wife of the chief from the Sawi was just on the ground, crying and crying and crying and crying. Kasi wala na yung kanyang anak, binigay dito banda. And they called that child the peace child. Because as long as that child was still alive, hindi pwedeng magkagira ang dalawang tribo. Because if they went to war, there would be a chance that they would kill their own child on the other side. When Don saw that, like boom, ito na ang kailangan ko para maintindihan nila kung sino talaga si Jesus. And so he called the tribe together again, one more time. And this time, he started from their own cultural practice of the peace child. And he said, nagkagira nga ang langit at ang lupa, ang Diyos at ang mga tao. Pero ang Diyos mismo ay nagpadala ng kanyang anak. God sent His own child to be the peace child. He gave His child to humanity, to be the peace child. And yes, He died to take our sins, but He rose again And unlike this peace child that will live, short yung life expectancy nila doon, 30 to 40 years lang, unlike this child that kung walang nangyari, 30 to 40 years lang ang peace. But for Jesus, with Jesus, the peace will be eternal, forever. That finally made sense to them. Now they understood kung bakit si Jesus ang bayani dun sa kwento at hindi si Judas. And that is called a redemptive analogy. Don went on to write a book called Eternity in Their Hearts. I don't recommend the book. May halong tama, may halong hindi tama. So basically, it's a very simple thesis. He believes that God has left something or some things in every culture that can serve as a bridge between Christianity and that culture para mas mabilis, mas madali makapasok ang mabuting balita dun sa kanila. And I think he's right. I think he's right. Now, sometimes those redemptive analogies have been destroyed or parang natakpan na ng modernism, secularism, ganon. Pero in my experience, every people group that we've gone to has something in their culture that can serve as a redemptive analogy. So, just as an example, dun sa aming mission naman, sa aming tribe, sa mga alangan. Nung dumating kami, when we came, our partners, we came to join another family, and our partners had already started in what we call CP. So, church planting methodology rather than church planting movement methodology. Talagang nagdiretso sila sa gospel preaching and baptism. And what the people told us later, many years later, is hindi talaga nila naintindihan. They really did not understand what the missionaries were teaching. But kind of like the man in the story yesterday, naramdaman nila na may power. And they felt that there was something good in what the missionaries were teaching. And so they accepted baptism. But again, they did not understand. Now, I need to give you a little bit of background dun sa mga mangyan. This may hurt a little bit. So, pasensya. I'm just going to tell the history, just what happened. Walang pinipili, walang ibig sabihin dito. Pero ito ang karanasan ng mga mangyan. In the 1500s, dati yung mga mangyan, sila lang talaga ang tao. They were the indigenous of that whole island. Okay? Each tribe went in a band from east to west across the island like that. In the 1500s, dumating yung unang mga immigrants galing sa Ilocos at galing sa Visayas. Now, I think na hindi naman siguro sadya, pero ang nangyari, the Mangyan culture, they are very non-confrontational. They do confront, pero only in very specific contexts. Hindi ka naman pwedeng lumapit lang sa isang tao at talagang sabihan sa kanya yung problema mo or yung gusto mong gawin niya. Hindi ganon. May process. You have to call a meeting and whatnot. So nung dumating ang mga immigrants galing sa ibang part ng Pilipinas, and then some of them ay talagang matapanga, talagang may dalang gulok or itak, may dalang baril, they pushed the Mangyan off of their lands. So first strike against outsiders. Masama talagang karanasan nila sa mga immigrants galing sa ibang lugar. And then abuses continued. Through the years, more and more and more and more happened. When we arrived, it was still happening. There was a Mangyan who wanted to become like the lowlanders. Gusto niya na maunlad. He wanted to develop. Umunlad siya. So may kunting patag doon, and he planted about 1 hectare of corn. Right when the corn was ready to be harvested, yung mga taga-baryo, taga-baba, umakyat sila na may dala silang baril, and they harvested all the corn and took it back down to the lowlands. Okay? When my mom ran a clinic, and one day, may dumating na pasyente na babae, nang sabi niya, 13 months pregnant. Yeah, tawa kayo, pero it was actually true. It's actually, I don't know how she was still alive 13 months into a pregnancy. But my mom was taking care of some other delikadong pasyente. And she said, I can't, this is out of my league. I don't really have much training in OB. And I'm already taking care of somebody else critical. Ask my dad, pakidalhin mo siya sa hospital. So silang mag-asawa, sinakay sa jeep. Back in those days, it was about a day's trip to go to the hospital. And when they got to the hospital, mahaba ang pila sa OPD. And bilang mangyan, hindi talaga siya papayagan na pumasok sa OPD except that my dad was an American. So my dad stood in line and wouldn't let anyone kick her out of line. And they waited hour after hour after hour to get into the OPD. Finally, they got to the door of the OPD. The doctor looked up, saw that she was a mangyan, and said, tama na, dyan ka lang. I know what's wrong with you. And he wrote out a prescription for paracetamol and sent her home. Okay, so this is the kind of treatment that the mangyan still receive. Okay, now that story had a happy ending. They actually tinaman sila ng bagyo, like they got hit by bagyo on the way home. The rivers were flooded, and they had to try to carry her across the flooded rivers, like up to here, and it was crazy. But anyway, they finally got back, and the only thing my mom knew to do was just put her on the most powerful antibiotic, na meron, and pray. And there was a lot of discharge, unti-unti, lumabas yung bata, and she lived. So yeah, by God's grace, she lived. But anyway, yun ang treatment ng mga mangyan. Where was I going? Oh yeah, so, and then on top of that, dagdag pa dyan, dumating naman yung mga Spanish. Now, alam naman natin kung anong nangyari sa Spanish. Para sa mga mangyan, ang nangyari sa kanila, naging slave. So doon sa Occidental, ang mga mangyan ay ginawang slave to build the churches, the Catholic churches. On the Oriental side, the mangyan were enslaved to build the galleons. May shipyard yung mga Spanish dun sa Puerto Galera, yung Calapan. So anyway, yun ang karanasan ng mga mangyan with the Spanish. So like strike two against outsiders. And then on top of that, there was World War II and the Japanese occupation. And what the Japanese did is they would come in, they would kill all of the men, they would rape all of the women, they would take anything that they could use or eat out of the village, and then they would burn it down. And then they would move on to the next village. So that was the last straw. At that point, wala na talaga silang tiwala sa anumang mga outsiders. At that point, talagang naging reclusive sila. At ayaw nilang makihalubilo sa anumang dayuhan. At ayaw rin nilang ituro ang kanilang mga paniniwala or lengguwahe sa ibang mga tao. Their experience was, anyone na pumasok sa kanila, sooner or later, sinamantala sila. Even people who pretended to be good, pretended to want their best good, that would learn a few words of their language, they would turn around and use that against them. Kaya talagang napaso talaga sila sa mga outsiders. So nung dumating kami, alam ba ninyo yung talahib? Familiar ba kayo sa talahib? Bugang? Yung river grass? Hindi naman kugon. Yeah. Bugang. Ang mga mangyan ay parang bugang. Yung dahon ng river grass na yun, it's very easy to move the grass. You can bend it any way you want to. But the roots, ang tindi talaga ng ugat ng bugang. Mahirap talagang bunutin at kahit mabunot mo, may maiwan pa rin. Sisibol uli yan. That's how the mangyan were. So when outsiders would come, they would just go with the flow and do whatever the outsiders told them to do just to get rid of them. Just so they wouldn't get angry, they wouldn't be killed, they wouldn't be taken more advantage of, and they would just wait until the outsider left, because inevitably, laging umaalis naman. Nobody stayed, nobody took the time, so they parang tinitiis lang nila. But their worldview never changed. Their worldview never changed. And so any changes that might have happened externally, bumalik lang agad sa dati, nung umalis yung mga outsiders. Kung dayuhan man galing sa ibang bansa or hindi. So yun ang situation. So when our partners were there, they had first batch of baptisms. There was another one right after we came. That was the one you saw in the picture yesterday, where Pistachio and some of the others were baptized. But about 3 years in, sawa na sila. Sawa na talaga. At may mga problems din. May mga, anytime, basta humans, may mga problems din. So all of the churches took their Bibles, they brought them up to our porch, nilatag nila yung mga Biblia doon sa balkon namin, at sabi nila, tapos na kami. We are done with Christianity. The whole Alangan church backslid, or umalis na sa pananampalataya. At that point, our partners also left. We were there. We were the only full-time missionaries there in the project. At na-realize ng tatay ko, we weren't getting to the root. we were like, kind of like Dale said, that we were starting to act like policemen. You know, watching their, like, parang pinipigil lang namin yung mga ginagawa nila. Wag ganun, wag ganun, wag ganun. Pero we weren't actually getting to real worldview, heart transformation. So, na-realize ng tatay ko, yung problem dito, makikita namin yung panglabas na ugali. We could see their external culture. But we especially their religious, their spiritual beliefs, they would not teach us. We were the first people ever, it's another story for another time, we were the first people ever to learn their language. Anyone outside of their own tribe. And that helped a little bit, but we weren't getting to their spiritual beliefs. So my dad, by faith, scheduled a series of meetings tungkol sa mga espiritu. 2 months out. And for 2 months, we tried and tried and tried, pero wala pa rin talagang nagtuturo sa amin tungkol sa kanilang mga paniniwala. Until 2 weeks out, 2 weeks from the beginning of the meetings, yung tatay ko nakaupo dun sa balkon ng bahay namin, nananalangin siya tungkol sa problem na ito. At dumating si Ramon. We need to talk about, help me to remember how to choose a leader. Itong si Ramon, he was one of the first baptized, pero siya ang pinakamahina. Mahinang-mahina talaga. When he would go to church, he didn't always attend, but when he did attend, he would always sit way in the back at nakipagchismisan lang doon sa parang mga barkada niya doon sa likod. And then, when he got sick, pinayagan niya na dalhin siya sa albularyo to the shaman. And he just didn't seem very serious, like parang outside external lang. We didn't know what was actually going on in his life, that actually he was the reason that the whole village was there. He had actually brought the whole village down from the mountains in response to dreams and visions that God had given him before any of us came. He brought the whole village down specifically to learn to be Christians. But we didn't know any of this. Externally, parang siyang pinaka-unlikely, pinaka-imposible na maging leader. Pero nung araw na yan, dumating si Ramon. He came up to the porch. He sat down on the porch next to my dad. At ang sabi niya, Pastor, anong ginagawa mo? Well, I'm praying. What are you praying about? So he described this problem at talagang, sabi niya, kailangan talagang maintindihan namin kasi yung dala namin ay life and death. Serious talaga ito. Pero hindi namin maipaliwanag sa inyo in a way na maintindihan ninyo because we don't understand your beliefs and understanding. So Ramon said, well, what do you want to know? Sabi ng tatay ko, everything. So Ramon started talking a mile a minute. And Dad said, wait. So pumasok siya sa loob, kumuha siya ng legal pad, and then yung pinaka-high-tech na meron noon ay yung miniature tape recorders. I don't know if anyone remembers those miniature, yeah. Tape recorder talaga, pero yung bala niya, mga ganun lang kalaki. Yeah. Miniature tape recorder. So he got one of those and the legal pad. Cartridge, yeah. And until like, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 at night, medyo mahinang tatay ko sa puyat. So maybe only until about midnight, Ramon talked. And Dad wrote everything down. When he couldn't handle anymore, Ramon went back to the village and he went to his father-in-law na siya ang pinaka-albularyo, the shaman of the village. And he didn't tell him why, but he asked him all the questions, all the things that he didn't know to tell my dad. And the next night, he came back and told my dad everything his father-in-law had told him the night before. And for the next 2 weeks, he did that every single night until we got to the first set of meetings. And we had learned a story in those meetings that we started off with. So, nung unang gabi, yung nanay ko ang nagsimula at siya ang nagkwento. And in that meeting, parang curious talaga sila kung ano ba talaga itong strange meeting ng mga missionaries. So most of the village was there. Even the older people, even the shamans, everybody was there. At ito ang kwento ng nanay ko. Ayon sa kwento ng mga mangyan. Many years ago, alam ng mga mangyan ang Diyos. Kilala nila ang Diyos. There are actually 6 worlds stacked on top of each other, and God lives in the 6th world, in the top. But each of those worlds is connected, and God actively was working all through all those 6 worlds. But, so the connection between earth and heaven was a balogo vine. Alam ba ninyo yung balogo? It's a vine na meron dun sa gubat. It's really curly vine, and its seeds are round and flat. Binubutasan, nilalagyan ng kawayan, and then ginagawang top. Ano sa Tagalog yung top? Kissing? Yeah. So, spinning, right. So you're still not familiar with balogo? Okay, anyway. But it's a curly vine, parang ganun, like a spiral. So, but this balogo vine was huge. And so it basically formed a spiral staircase paakyat sa langit. At yun ang daan nila para makapunta mula sa bundok ng Paragpagan, punta sa unang langit. Ang unang langit, ang pangalan ay Alitaw. And back then, the only place you could get rice was in Alitaw. There was no rice on earth. It was forbidden to plant rice down here. And so they would go up, they would plant, they would harvest, and they would pound the rice, and then they would bring it back down here. But it wasn't difficult like it is now. It was easy work. Just magaan lang yung trabaho noon. Until one day, one man, I'll tell you the clean version, may another version, pero yung clean version, isang lalaki, tinago niya isang pirasong palay sa parang yung belt, bayakos ang tawag namin, yung belt of his G-string. He brought one piece of rice down, he planted it, and multiplied it until yung mundo dito sa baba, puno rin ng palay. Now, there were no problems back then. Wala pang mga spirits, walang kamatayan, walang gutom. But because there was so much rice on earth, people stopped going to Alitaw. And Alitaw got really lonely, and the people kind of forgot about Alitaw. Until one day, a little girl, sabi niya sa tatay niya, gusto ko talagang makita ang Alitaw. Pwede bang ihatid mo ako doon? Samahan mo ako doon. Kaya sabi ng tatay niya, okay, when we have time, when we're not too busy. And later on, pagtapos siguro yung anihan nila, they started climbing up. Pero alam mo naman yung suot nila noon, medyo parang bahag lang, kahit lalaki, kahit babae, parang bahag lang. Nauna yung anak niya, tumingin, dalaga na yung anak niya, tumingin siya sa taas, nakita niya yung kahubaran ng anak niya, tinila niya, at nirip niya doon sa puno ng balogo. At that point, the balogo vine broke off from heaven and fell into the earth. And the connection between heaven and earth was broken. And then the spirits came in after that. And that's when death came in. And all of the problems, sickness, hunger, all of the problems that they face came from that. Ang pagkaalam nila, nagtampo ang Diyos sa kanila. I don't know how to say tampo in English, but it's like you get upset and angry and you don't want to talk to them anymore. Like you turn your back on them and reject them and don't want to talk to them anymore. Parang sa tingin nila, nagtampo ng Diyos sa kanila. So even today, when the Mangin pray, when the Mangin do their ceremonies, they always pray to God first. But God never answers, so then they go on and talk to the other spirits, the ones that they have been abused and tortured by for all of these centuries. So my mom told this story, and then she said, what you didn't know, what you don't know, what the spirits didn't want you to know, is that God didn't leave you. Hindi nagtampo ang Diyos sa inyo. The spirits didn't want you to know, and they've been deceiving you. They've been trying to keep you from knowing. But the truth is that, actually, they even knew that, I forgot to say this, they even knew that God had a son, and that God's son came to earth, and they killed him. Alam nila yun. Okay, they also knew about Satan. They knew about Satan too. Pero sa kanila, si Satanas ang pinakamaliit. Parang ganito lang kaliit. At nagbubulong lang siya ng tukso. He would just whisper temptations in their ears. Whereas the other spirits would literally torture them and kill them. So parang baliwala lang sa kanila. When we started there preaching, without studying first, we tried to, but they wouldn't tell us. Without understanding what they believed. When we told them about God and told them about God's Son coming in order to save them from sin, they knew about sin too. Pero 5 lang ang kasalanan. Murder, adultery, theft, and stinginess. I forget the 5th one, but stinginess is the worst. Yung pagiging madamot, yung talagang pinakamatinding kasalanan sa kanila. Really. If you didn't do those 5 sins, you were perfect. May tao doon talaga, yung pangalan ni si Capero, namatay na siya ngayon, pero pagkaalam nila, perfect talaga si Capero because they've never seen him do any of those 5 things. But it took us about 6 years before we learned that Capero was perfect because it didn't matter. Baliwala. Because it didn't matter. There was no consequences to sin. When you died, every joint, every organ of your body went to a different place. At pumunta sila doon whether you sinned or not. So again, when we came talking about sin, the problem of sin, they knew what sin is. Talking about how God created us, they knew that already. and how He sent His Son to save us from our sin. Why do we need to be saved from sin? He talked about Satan as God's enemy. Oh, we know Satan, pero hindi naman malaking bagay si Satanas. So they heard all of the words that we were saying, pero iba ang kanilang interpretation, iba ang meaning para sa kanila. But this night, when we used their story, it shifted the meaning in their mind. This time, they realized na dinaya sila ng mga espiritu na actually, ang Diyos hindi nagtampo sa kanila. At actually, si Satanas na nagkukunwari na siyang pinakamahina, that actually he was the strongest. He was the boss of all the spirits. And that he was the arch enemy of God and was trying to keep them from being reconciled to God. At na ang Diyos ay nagpadala ng kanyang anak to be the replacement of the balog of wine. And that if anyone believed on him, that he could be reconnected with God. That was the beginning of the church among the Mangyan. That was the redemptive analogy that got past this and down to the heart. So mag-aaral muna tayo bago mangaral. Take the time. Take the time to study. Take the time to learn. Some cultures, redemptive analogies are not a huge part of ministry. I'm not saying that every culture it will be like a life-changing or a whole tribe-changing effect. Like the Tawid, yung pangalawang tribo na pinuntahan ko, for them, knowledge is power. So if Michael knows something, as a shaman especially, he won't tell anyone else. He will only pass it down to one of his children. Ipamana niya yung knowledge na yan kasi kapangyarihan yon. And kapangyarihan is a good way to make money. So, money or whatever they have, whatever they want. So for them, knowledge is compartmentalized at walang kwento na applicable to the whole tribe. So I could not use redemptive analogies with the Tawid. It wasn't useful. Other places, like in Cordillera region, they have those stories, but they've become so secular that hindi gaano pinapaniwalaan nila. Hindi gaano tumatalab yung mga ganung kwento. But we still recommend studying them. We still recommend studying them for two reasons. First of all is you will gain respect. If you know their culture, you know their story, you know their history, you can mention those things as you're talking with them. And the second reason is merong commonalities usually across all of their stories. If you learn the majority of their stories, start looking for the themes in those stories, and you will find some of those underlying mas malalim na mga values underneath. So for the Mangyan, for example, almost every single Mangyan story talks about somebody na inaapi ng mga dayuhan. And then they overcome that, nagwawagi ang mga Mangyan sa pamamagitan ng pagiging mautak at spiritual power. Okay, that's very, very, very common theme amongst them. Okay, redemptive analogies. Parang may isa pa akong redemptive analogy dito. Yes.
Two reasons why we need to redemptive analogies. One is get respect.
Well, the first is actually if they have a redemptive analogy na magamit mo bilang tulay. But even if their stories are not useful as a redemptive analogy, I would still recommend learning them to gain respect. Parang maramdaman nila na mahalaga. Like you value their culture, you value their history. And the second is that you can start to see the underlying values as you see many of their stories that sumibol naman yung mga kwento na yan galing sa karanasan nila in the past.
Actually, Sir John,
Yeah.
the Manobos, they have the story of Noah.
Of Noah.
Yeah.
Elijah.
They claim that their grandfather was the Manobo was Noah. And then, Shem, Ham, Japheth,
Uh-huh.
the wife. So 8 of them, they said.
Uh-huh.
So when they told me, I told them, I know your grandfather. Who is he? It's Noah. The name is Noah. And then, we were very close.
Uh-huh.
And Japheth
Uh-huh.
and the wife. So we have the flood story.
Uh-huh.
That was the beginning. Into the pioneering area.
Very good. Excellent. So that's definitely a redemptive analogy. Mm-hmm.
Was really was really the bridge.
Mhm.
And I told them about the Bible. The story is
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so we would go on from that to say, because of oral history, pasa, ama sa anak, ama sa anak, ama sa anak. May mga na distort konti. Pero this book was written way back when to protect the actual. So hindi naman namin minamaliit yung kanilang history. We started there and then we said, like, this is the more accurate. Like back to the original. So may mga bagay na nagkamali lang sa pagkapasa-pasa. But you know what happened with the First Nations, the many of the Native Americans in the U.S.? Many of them also knew the true God before any missionaries came. But the missionaries, most of them at least, didn't take the time to study before teaching, and they presented the gospel, they presented Jesus and God as a foreign God. And it was very, very difficult to accept a foreign God. When in reality, many of them already knew the God, they just needed an update. Some more things that they had missed. Oh. Contextualizing, yes, absolutely. Okay. Questions, comments, alternate speeches about redemptive analogies? Yes.
What the Bible is trying to say is, one of the tribes in Manobo tribe, we call that as the legends in our own language. The legends, myth, mythology. So, one, as you said, it's sometimes you just can hear it. It somehow it has a equivalent to the Bible story, but also it's quite exciting. And I've learned this from like how to align it. They would be very glad to tell more details of it and get it aligned with what they believe along with the Bible, and it would be amazing.
Yeah, great.
So I see.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some people, like I said, I think this is easier with this group because of the Sulad history. But some people are very concerned about studying pagan stories, pagan legends, and whatnot. We'll talk about that later. We'll get to that. There's actually precedent in the Bible for studying and using stories, pagan stories. Yeah. All right, second one. Second point here. Why to study the culture? Avoid offense, avoid cultural blunders. So I need a chair here. Does anybody here remember John Dibdall? Well, Don probably remembers John Dibdall. Anybody else? Oh, that's sad. That's a passing of an era. John Dibdall was one of the most well-known, very good Adventist missiologists. John Dibdall, he started his mission work in Chiang Mai Academy in Thailand. And in Thailand, you may, some of you may have heard, in Thailand, yung kultura nila doon, the higher parts of your body are more clean, almost banal, yung mas mataas na parte ng katawan. Then the lower parts are more dirty, and almost like kung sa Tagalog parang halos kalapastangan yung pinakababa. So of course the dirtiest part, is this similar in India? Some cultures. Okay. So for the Thai, like the dirtiest part of the body is the bottom of the foot. Yeah, yung pinakatalampakan mismo. Yeah. Huh? Lapa-lapa? Hindi lapu-lapu. Okay. Lapa-lapa. Okay. So when John came to Thailand as an American man, he had a habit of sitting similar to how Michael is sitting, like this. So like for Thai people, showing the bottom of your foot is worse than showing this finger, in the West. So America, this is a curse. In Thailand, that's even worse. That's really, 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 really bad. So John had a habit of sitting like this. And so at this point, I'm just like, totally disrespecting, totally like the worst offense that I could give to you guys over here. And then, kasi pag naboboring, like spread the curse around. Yeah. So dun sa likod, nakikita ba ninyo? Yeah, yung ganun. All right. So that's something that that John had to learn and had to break that habit. And so, by the way, not always in the Philippines, but some places in the world, it's effeminate to sit like this, for men to sit like this. I learned to sit like this because I lived in Thailand for 4 years. At sa Thailand, ganito ang upo ng lalaki. Also, men also sit like this, like kung sasahig. Like in America, that would be a very effeminate way for a man to sit. Pero sa Thailand, it's totally normal. Totally normal to sit like that or like this. Kasi hindi nga pwedeng ipakita yung baba ng paa to other people. Okay? So these are some of the cultural things that you need to study in order to avoid offense. There's another story I wanted to tell you. We'll come back to that. Balikan natin yung Thailand, yung mga paa dun sa Thailand. But one other thing that I learned, when I came to the Mangyan, to like my second time, na-realize ko, nakita ko sa kanila na may mga times na talagang sinasabi nila ang kanilang sama ng loob. Talagang pinapalabas nila ang kanilang mga problema. So I said, oh, I thought that they were very, very like reclusive and quiet and not confrontational, but pwede naman pala. I guess it's okay. So I can let out that American side of me and just say what's wrong. Say what the problems are that need to be fixed. So my partner, who was also my kind of adopted brother, when I had a problem with him, I just went up to him and told him the problem. Say, we need to fix this. I hurt him so bad that to this day, there still is some leftovers from that broken relationship at that point. And so I went back home, scratching my head, brokenhearted that I had hurt my brother like that, but also scratching my head. Why is it that nakikita ko naman sila na talagang sinasabi nila ng direkta? Minsan talagang galit na galit. But when I just went simply, not even angry, and told my brother the problem that I had, grabing nasaktan siya. As I continued learning, I figured out that may certain context lang kung saan pwedeng ganon. At ang context na yon is a duly called meeting. So like a meeting is kind of one of the central aspects ng kanilang culture. At kung may problem ako kay Mike, kailangan magtawag ako ng meeting. Kung maliit lang, like within the family, I can just maybe call my father-in-law or call an uncle or something like that. If it's a bigger deal, then I need to talk to the captain. At yung kapitan naman ang magtawag ng meeting. And in the meeting, that's the only place where you can really express all of your emotions. In fact, alam ba ninyo yung nganga? Yung beetle nut? Yeah, beetle nut. Meron ba dito sa Mindanao? Anong tawag dito? Nganga rin. Okay. So, nagnganga sila bago mag-meeting para lumakas ang loob nila at kaya nila talagang ilabas so that they can express themselves strongly. Yeah, and that's also when they're dating. So, kung gusto ko manligaw, I will nganga first, and then I will give nganga to the girl that I want to date. Para may lakas loob. Kasi nakakahiya naman ang maglapit sa dalaga kasi. Yeah. So, be careful. Baka kung na-offeran kayo ng nganga, may ibig sabihin yan. So speaking of strange dating customs, Mike has a different story on that one. But a friend of mine was a missionary in Papua New Guinea. Well, it's a story from Dale. And one of the young men at APIU, is that right? Is that the name of the university? PAU. No, in Papua New Guinea. Yeah, okay. Papuan Adventist, PAU. Okay. So isa sa mga estudyante dun sa PAU, isang binata, during their course of classes, meron siyang na-meet na isang dalaga na just friends. Like it wasn't anything terribly serious. They just were kind of friends. You can be friends with a girl. You don't have to be in a romantic relationship. And one day the girl said, "Hey, you want to come over and eat lunch at my place? My parents' place?" So like appropriate naman yun. Nandiyan naman yung mga magulang niya. It's not like they were just the two of them going off somewhere, right? So sure, why not? So he came over, And when they got to the house, her father opened the door and greeted him, said hi, was really friendly, and shook his hand. And they went in and they ate lunch, and then they went home and continued classes. Walang problema, just continued on like normal. Pero next morning, like 6 a.m., nagising yung lalaki na may kumakatok doon sa pintuan niya. At pagbuksan niya yung pintuan, nandiyan yung dalaga, dala-dala ang lahat ng mga bag niya. Hi, good morning. You all right? Is there a problem? Oh, I'm moving in. You're moving in? Yeah, we're married now. And he said, what? I'm not ready to get married. So he ran to his father, who was an engineer for the government, like a medyo mataasang position as a government. Sabi niya, Dad, I'm not ready to get married. Like I'm just starting college here. This was just a friendship. What's going on? And he said, son, you got to be careful. You got to learn the culture. Because that tribe, galing sa ibang tribo kasi yung dalaga. In that tribe, if you shake hands with the father-in-law, then that is an agreement. Yun na yung kontrata for marriage. And the guy said, I don't want to marry this girl, and we're just friends. And Dad said, son, there's been tribal warfare between our tribes for centuries. If you don't marry her, you're going to offend them so badly that the war is going to start up again. You're stuck. You are married to this girl. So be careful. Be careful. Baka handshake lang ay may ibig sabihin yun. So, mag-aaral muna bago mag-handshake. Yeah, as far as I know, they're still married. Yeah. I don't know what happened after that, other than that they got married. They were both Adventists, so I hope and presume that they were faithful to their accidental vows. Yeah. Okay. One more story in this section, and then I think it'll be time for a break. So balik tayo sa Thailand. Balik tayo sa Thailand. Now remember what I said, the higher parts of the body. So in Thailand, basically the shoulder is neutral. So generally, especially kung kaibigan kayo, pwede mo naman hawakan yung balikat. Pero yung ulo, hindi. Huwag mo talagang hawakan. Even a barber, like I go to the barber to get my haircut, right? But he will ask permission before he touches my hair. Kasi parang almost banal yung ulo. And then yung paa, opposite. Yun yung pinakamarumi, kalapastangan, curse, yung paa. Right? Okay, so back in 70 years ago, 50 years ago. Anyway, I'm bad at math. It was 1970s. How long ago was that? 50 years ago. Thank you. Okay. There were 2 Mormon missionaries in Thailand. Alam naman natin, yung mga binata, yung mga binata dalaga, pero these 2 were 2 young men. And their supervisor came from America. So simply, pagdating yung bossing mo, ipapasyal mo siya. Excuse me. They took him around to kind of tour the area. And the one of the places that they went to in this area, they had one of the famous golden statues of the reclining Buddha. Yung Buddha na nakaganyan, nakahiga sa gilid. Yeah. So they went there, and apparently hindi sobrang marami ang tao, and they also didn't have digital cameras back then. The cameras back then were the film ones, right? So they gave their camera to their boss, to their supervisor, and they said, "Will you please take a picture of us?" And then what did they do? They climbed up onto Buddha. So they're standing. Like in Thailand, you always take your shoes off everywhere. In every church, every house, even some stores, like the regular stores, like a supermarket, no, but a regular store, you take your shoes off, even going into a store. If you go to a temple, you always take your shoes off outside of the temple. Everywhere in the temple you walk around. But where there's a statue of Buddha, they'll have a piece of carpet around the statue of Buddha. You can't even stand barefoot. You have to kneel. If you want to go, like get a picture with Buddha, you have to, crawl on your knees. Ganun kabanal ang Buddha para sa kanila, yung mga statues ni Buddha. So these 2 young men went up to Buddha and climbed up onto Buddha with their feet. But that's not all. Then they climbed up onto Buddha's head. And they sat on Buddha's head with their feet dangling in his face. And then their boss took pictures of them. After ng supervisory visit ng boss nila, bumalik yung boss nila sa Amerika, and the two young men, dinala nila yung kanilang film dun sa developer. The developer saw those pictures. And he gave them their copy, the copy that they paid for, but they didn't know he made a lot more copies. At binigyan niya ng copy ang lahat ng mga major newspapers. Wala pang internet noon, so newspapers talaga yung source of news. All around Thailand for 5 days, yung pinaka-cover page ng lahat ng mga major diaryo sa Thailand ay yung dalawang Mormon na binata na nakaupo sa ulo ni Buddha ng mga paa nila ay sa kanyang mukha. They were arrested and put in prison. They were given a court date. And so for their hearing, para sa hearing, pumunta yung mga matataas ng mga pinuno ng Mormons galing sa Amerika. And when they were given a chance to speak, to explain, the Mormon leaders, they said to the judge, oh, Your Honor, we're so sorry. We're so sorry. We didn't know that this was your cultural practice. We didn't know that this was your belief. Mas lalong nagalit. The judge got even more angry. He said, you are here as spiritual teachers, as religious teachers. You're here to tell us that we're wrong and you're right, and that we should become like you. And now you're telling me that you didn't even take the time, didn't even make the effort to learn what we believe. How can you tell us that we're wrong and you're right when you don't even know what we believe? They were thrown in prison, and for the next 50 years, Mormons were banned from Thailand. It was just recently that Mormons were allowed back into the country again. Study to avoid offense. Yeah, buti na lang hindi Adventist. Now, when I grew up hearing all these stories, so parang takot ako pagpasok sa isang bagong lugar. Like it's impossible that I'm not going to make some sort of mistake, right? So people understand that though. People understand that if you are trying, if you're doing your best to study, trying your best to be circumspect, maingat at respectful at nag-aaral tayo, they will give you leeway. They will be merciful. Pero wag gayahin yung ginawa ng mga dalawang binata na yan na they should have known. I should have known. At that point, they should have known. There's no excuse for them to not have known that other than talagang hindi nila binigyan ng halaga ang pag-aaral ng kanilang mga ugali. So, study their culture for redemptive analogies and to avoid offense. And kind of inserted in here yung sabi ni Kuya Jerry, yung respect for their culture, and we'll come back to learning their values. Okay? It is time for a break. So, 10 minutes. See you here again for the next section.
Amen.